between the lines. The program run by our excellent library services intended to generate community discussion around a shared experience of a text. Between the Lines is a lecture and dialogue series run by the Humanities Department that provide professors a space to, and recently students to share some of their engagement with humanistic inquiry, broadly construed. This evening, it's my immense pleasure to introduce Professor Andrea Walton. Professor Walton teaches composition and literature here at her alma mater, Illinois Central College, having graced us with her brilliance for 10 years now. Professor Walton was born in Peoria, though she has lived throughout the United States, including in Texas, East St. Louis, and Las Vegas. She found an early intellectual mentor and academic inspiration in her Uncle Charles, a K-12 educator in District 150. While in college at Eastern Illinois University, Professor Walton was able to learn from Dr. Francine McGregor and was immersed in the study of Black feminist writers such as Bell Hooks, Toni Morrison, and Gwendolyn Brooks. Hooks, Morrison, and Brooks, along with philosopher Angela Davis and, of course, Octavia Butler, remain cornerstones of Professor Walton's analytical perspective. During her graduate studies, continued at Eastern Illinois University, Professor Walton received mentorship from Dr. Dagny Bredesen, whose guidance helped to cultivate her research and academic writing skills, of which we are now the lucky beneficiaries. By anchoring her work at research in feminist literary studies, with an emphasis on feminism and the role of the Manny character in North American literature and culture, work which she presented at the 2022 Modern Language Association National Conference. Professor Walton's goal is to shed light on the contradictory portrayal of African American women in literature and to encourage a representation of African American women that recognizes the full scope of their humanity and their innumerable contributions to anything good about our society. Please join me in welcoming Professor Walton for her talk, The Traumatic Experiences of Time Travel in Octavia Butler's Kindred. There are worse things than being dead.
Rhea, the meeting is being recorded and there's a screen on your thing there. You'll have to get rid of.
Oh, okay. Thanks. Got it. Okay, I actually want to get my flyer. I just realized I needed it now. Look at these guys. Welcome. As I had this wonderful introduction, Justin, thank you so much for introducing me. Is this okay? Is there echoey things happening? I hope not. Hopefully we all had a chance to get a flyer, handout, and whatever you want to call it, because we'll be kind of focusing on two things here. Okay. Welcome to the traumatic experience of time travel in Octavia Butler's Kindred. There are worse things than being dead. By Professor Andrea Walton. Okay, here's a wonderful picture I found. Unfortunately, I couldn't find an image of Octavia Butler holding Kindred, so this is the closest. Because this is my Kindred. Okay, moving right along. Okay, so I want to go through an itinerary. While I will have it up here, you guys will have it on the front of your handouts. The itinerary of what's going to be going on.
We need the technical.
I
Need to share screen.
All right.
They can't see.
Let me escape. And I also forgot to.
Let's go for the outline.
Thank you. No, see.
Awesome. All right, so I'm gonna dive in. All right, so lovely, beautiful technology. But it's here to make our lives easier. Okay, back to our itinerary. I'm gonna begin with opening quotes in a short timeline of 1800 through 1830. This is actually gonna be a kind of a video. And then I'm gonna pull out some key points from the video. Then we're gonna go through some imagery, testimony of Black slaves, nexus of Black women, summary of Butler's kindred, themes and quotes, humanity scholarship, which is what we all came in for, and a rhetorical question for you all to chew on. I'm gonna ask you guys, like I normally ask in class, are there any thoughts or questions about the itinerary for today? Okay, disclaimer and alert. There are highly offensive and biased imagery and opinions in this presentation. If you believe that you'll be offended by slavery accounts or historical racism, leave now, please. I'm not forcing you to stay. So. Brave souls. Nice. Opening quote. I don't know what I'm doing here, Ruth. And that was said by Dana Franklin, which is the main character in Kindred. Verse kind of give us a historical context of what's happening from 1800 to 1830. Now, I'm focusing on this time period because if any of us know anything about Kindred, we know that Dana, the main character, is pulled back to 1815, which is smack dab in the middle of this time period here. So what I'm going to do now is show a little clickety clack of history that's happening right now. Is this going to work?
Good question.
Did I do it?
We didn't test that. We should, if I'd have known that, we would have tested that.
Yeah.
Team is the NFL and
And we
CBS.
got the
Live.
out of her.
Hi, I'm John Green. This is Crash Course U.S. History, and today we're going to talk about slavery, which is not funny. Yeah, so we put a lay on the eagle to try to cheer you up, but let's face it, this is going to be depressing. With slavery, every time you think like, oh, it couldn't have been that bad, it turns out to have been much worse. Mr. Green, but what about me from the best? I'm going to stop you right there because you're going to embarrass yourself. Slavery was hugely important to America. I mean, it led to a civil war, and it also lasted what, at least in U.S. history, counts as a long-ass time, from 1619 to 1865. And yes, I know there's a 1,200-year-old church in your neighborhood in Denmark, but we're not talking about Denmark. But slavery is most important because we still struggle with its legacy. So yes, today's episode will probably not be funny, but it will be important. So the slave-based economy in the South is sometimes characterized as having been separate from the market revolution, but that's not really the case. Without Southern cotton, the North wouldn't have been able to industrialize, at least not as quickly, because cotton textiles were one of the first industrially produced products and the most important commodity in world trade by the 19th century. And 3/4 of the world's cotton came from the American South. And speaking of cotton, why has no one mentioned to me that my collar has been half popped this entire episode, like I'm trying to recreate the flying nun's hat? And although there were increasingly fewer slaves in the North as Northern states outlawed slavery, cotton shipments overseas made Northern merchants rich. Northern bankers financed the purchase of land for plantations. Northern insurance companies insured slaves who were, after all, considered property and very valuable property. And in addition to turning cotton into cloth for sale overseas, Northern manufacturers sold cloth back to the South, where it was used to clothe the very slaves who had cultivated it. But certainly the most prominent effects of the slave-based economy were seen in the South. The profitability of slave-based agriculture, especially King cotton, meant that the South would remain largely agricultural and rural. Slave states were home to a few cities, like St. Louis and Baltimore, but with the exception of New Orleans, almost all Southern urbanization took place in the Upper South, further away from those large cotton plantations. And slave
Okay, that was a little bit of history of what's happening in this 1800 through 1830 time period. Now, I'm sure we were all paying attention to that horrible, beautiful video, but just in case we weren't. I pulled out some key points from the video just to kind of keep it in mind. And again, this is a historical context of what's happening right now. So first and foremost, some key points. Slavery happened for a long, bleak time. Okay, so we have 1619 to 1865, slavery is occurring, and it kind of helped to form American economy, where we're kind of obtaining this cane, cotton, and we know who picked that, right? And then sugar, wheat, all the things. This is not a minor aspect of American society. Next, we have a Louisiana Purchase, and this, of course, we kind of know what Louisiana Purchase is. U.S. obtained land from indigenous folks, either in contract or conquest. Okay, next, in 1808, Congress bans the import of slaves from Africa. Next, in the War of 1812, British attempts to restrict U.S. trade and Americans' desire to expand territory. This was known as the Second War of Independence. Next, we have Missouri Compromise, which prohibited slavery north of the southern boundary of Missouri. That sounds suspicious. And moving right along, the slave population in the U.S. reaches more than 2 million by the time we reach 1830. So this is kind of letting us know where we're at, what's happening, where Dana's getting pulled back to. So now that I've given us like an overview of how things are looking, now I want to kind of show you guys some testimonials. And while these testimonials, I call them testimonials, we'll be focusing somewhat on women. It's more so kind of talking about this male slave account. Trigger warning, the first image that is going to make you mad is going to be this one. This is a slave collar. And what I wanted to do was going to show you guys a video of how the slave collar was used. And this is by historian Anthony Cohen.
Now, this is a replica of a slave collar. And after I do my demonstration, I'll pass it around. We'll do show and tell. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to stand right here.
Yes.
Sir, you stand right here. You stand where you are. I use a simple nut and bolt to keep this closed. And gentlemen, you're gonna reach down and pick it up. And you're going to open it up, that's right. You, sir, are gonna put your finger over your Adam's apple. We hope your neck is not too thick for this, and we hope we don't clip you. Okay, hold on one second. Are you all right? Okay, close it. Is it pinching you? Good. Remove your finger. And I want you to put your hands on both of these bars that are extending in front of you. I will just put this on so it doesn't fall off. To date, this has never gotten stuck on anyone, so we will hope. And my volunteers, please stand to the side, but do not sit down. Okay, so I'm going to tell the rest of the story. Are you okay? Great. This was put on a person to keep them from getting into the woods. If you traveled with this, first of all, you'd stick out like a sore thumb. People would know you did something wrong. You could not lay down or sleep with this, but in my mind, I had it all figured out. I had seen in the woods at times where trees had fallen and were leaning up against other trees at an angle. I figured I'd wear it, straddle the tree, and get a good night's sleep. I figured that if I came face to face with any danger, I could just simply take one of the prongs and, you know, fight off the wild animal or whatnot. Or if I crossed a stream and I got wet, I could take off my clothes, put them on the prongs, and keep on running. So I had it all figured out. I go, I pick it up. The man's assistants put it on my neck, and I instantly realized that I could not go on my journey wearing this thing. The reason being, if I tripped and fell, the prongs would hit the ground first and my neck would break.
Okay, so that's a demonstration of what a slave collar is, right? Or traumatized. All right, so that's the first thing. Another thing I want to show you guys was a ex-slaves talking about their experience of slavery. Now you will notice with this video, what they kind of are saying is kind of garbly. So if we flip back the first page of our flyer, we'll give it a summary, and right underneath that is the somewhat emphasized text of ex-slaves talking about slavery. And this is what they're saying in this clip right now.
There's one simple vision hack anyone can use to improve vision. So you can say goodbye to your optometrist for good. Did you?
No, I'm leaving.
I remember that just as well, look like to me, I think.
It's slaves all, it's mother was slave, sister was slave, father was slave.
They know that's why we realize that all the dialogue that teaching mind and lost and missing. Mom didn't even know where to go, she had to shoot, just like you told some mom to do, didn't know where to go.
Okay, so that's a little bit of snippet of slaves talking about their experience with slavery. Okay. And then finally, this is one last snippet that I have of two former slaves talking about their experience with slavery. These are married folk.
He worked hard. He worked hard.
I work hard. I get up at 4 o'clock and get my breakfast done. Just as dawn of day, I go to the field and we pick cotton.
Mr. and Mrs. Haywood Jenkins of Sharkey County, Mississippi have between them picked cotton for over a century.
My boss man came along, he says, Mary Jane, I said, sir, I say, when you wash? I said, I washed last night. He said, I don't want you to do that no more. That's my agent, you know. He says, every Friday morning or Friday evening, you wash. And let all the children stay there with you until you get through. When you get through, then y'all go back to field away. Now, the agents was mean, some of them. Some of them was mean. They want to hook the colored people. And that time, the white man come along. He says, hey, but you ain't in the field yet? He just that started to climb. He said, yes, I just not had to eat my dinner. God damn it, you ain't doing a goddamn thing. He says, God damn it, ought to take this damn stick and free the hell out. And he said, no, he said, if you free the hell out of me, goddamn, I free the hell out of you. Make me feel bad if I was under them, you know, how mean he was to treat us like that.
Okay, so there are a few slavery accounts of kind of like how slavery was back in the day. And this is just, again, to kind of offer us a historical context and I guess artifacts. We'll look at this experience here. Okay, well, of course, male slaves were treated like crap. Was the experience any easier for female slaves? No. No. There you go.
No.
Thank you. Okay, so now we want to talk about this next section, which is Black women as nexus. Now here we have Dr. Deborah Gray White, I'll say her name correctly, and she is a professor at Rutgers University. She professor of history and professor of women and gender studies at Rutgers University. And in her work, Aren't I a Woman? She talks about this idea of Black woman as nexus. Is my definition still here? It is not. Okay, it is. So if you want to know what a nexus is, it's down there at the bottom. Okay. So this idea of Black woman as nexus, she's presented as two bad things at the same time. Number one, she is a minority, right? She's African American, which is a minority, right? And then in addition to that, simultaneously, she's also a woman, which is often considered the weaker sex, the fairer sex. So she's both of these bad things at the same time. Okay, so this puts her in a horrible, right, situation. But she can't, as she says, as Dr. Gray White says, she cannot escape this mythology. Okay, and now I want to document just the women's experience under slavery. We talked about men, we talked about some of the things that they went through. And this is the women's experience here.
I saw war, I saw bombing, I saw
how you, even though, as we'll see, they were often expected to do the exact same labor as enslaved men. The deeply entrenched patriarchy in European cultures extended across racial lines and played a significant role in shaping African captives' monetary worth. And even though enslaved women were not sold at the same high price range as enslaved men, their value to those who purchased them was absolutely crucial. In many regions of the colonies, enslaved women's ability to reproduce is hugely important. Buying a laborer who could bear children meant that once those children got older, the enslaver could either exploit that child's labor or sell that child for a profit. And as we've discussed, one of the most consequential laws that developed around slavery in the colonial era was Virginia's use of partus sequitur ventrum, codified by the Virginia Assembly in 1662, which established the legal precedent that defined an enslaved person by their mother's status, not their father's. Therefore, regardless of the father's race, an enslaved Black woman's child would automatically be classified as the property of her enslaver, meaning that children had from an enslaved woman and a white man who may have even enslaved her would be born into slavery and owned by their father in their job.
So there was that, or you said, so speak into it, Amy?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so that was just a snippet a bit of how women were treated during this specific section of history. So, what I kind of like here is, we're taking this idea of slavery, right? Women going through the slavery idea. And we can probably imagine that while these slave owners are assaulting their female slaves, they're having children by them. And as we just saw in the video, the child will be seen as a slave, not as a slave master child necessarily, who take on the status of the slave parents. So we're looking at this idea, and of course, if assault is happening, if children are being produced here, it's not usually consensual, right? So, Dr. Lisa A. Long talks about this idea of non-consensual sexual assault, and the idea that in history, it's probably something that will be seen as incestuous, right? Because sometimes these owners are having sex with their slaves and producing children. Sometimes it could be something that these slave owners also have. And of course, their children. Excuse me. But then more specifically, we make this a little bit more concrete. We can see this even happening in Butler's work, Kindred. I don't know if how many of us have read the book, but towards the end, it kind of looks like that's what's going to happen to Dana. Like Rufus is going to get Dana, and Dana is part of his bloodline. So we kind of see that there. And so here, Dr. Lisa A. Long is saying that rape becomes incestuous. Even Rufus says about his slave love, Alice Greenwood, I could have had her in the bushes years ago if that's all I wanted. So here it kind of says where he has free license to assault his slave, but also maybe he might have some kind of.
Oh, is that your electrolyte one?
Oh, sorry.
I don't know. But also he may have some kind of humanity because he said, if that's all I wanted, right? Well, that's wonderful and great and everything and beautiful, but I've never read Kindred. Can you please give me a brief summary? Absolutely. Going back to Dr. Lisa A. Long, she also gives a great summary of Kindred. Now, while I do have it here, it is also on your handout, right above the English title of the text. But I'm not reading that. You're more than welcome to read it though. I will, however, show the Hulu series, which I thought was very true to the book. That was a great synopsis.
Sounds like you were just sleepwalking. This has never happened before. Can be caused by sleep deprivation, stress.
What is this? I'm not dreaming.
The date, the year, tell me the year.
It's 1815.
We just heard a lot of screaming. Is everything okay in there?
When was I gone?
Less than a minute, not even seconds.
It felt like I was gone for an hour. I know how this sounds. Am I crazy? Surprise.
You're not crazy. Whatever this is. It's for you.
Thank you, Hulu. So that is a brief summary, kind of sort of Kindred. Okay, now we've looked at history, we've looked at even some scholarship on this, but now we'll look at how Octavia Butler looks at her own work, and not really Kindred necessarily, but more so sci-fi writing and inserting herself into that. So I do have an interview. I have an interview that I found on NPR by Terry Gross, where in this interview, I'm kind of starting in the middle of it, but she says, "You're one of the few African Americans and one of the fewer African American women writing in the genre of science fiction. What speaks to you about this genre?" And this is the clip I did not get up before the talk. So let me get this guy going.
Hey, NPR listeners. Planet Money can tie any topic back to the economy. And from unpacking the debt ceiling to starting a record label, they make it educational and entertaining. Click the play button below to listen to a recent episode. Support for NPR and Planet Money comes from Raymond James, tailored wealth management, banking, and capital markets solutions for clients' unique needs. Disclosures at raymondjames.com.
This is Fresh Air. I'm Terry
Okay, that's Terry Gross. And we're gonna go to the section where she talks about this. Octavia Butler is answering this question.
What speaks to you about the genre?
I write science fiction because, first of all, I like it. I always liked it. When I was a kid, I read it and enjoyed it. And it was one of the first things that I began writing. I also write it because it offers me such freedom. There isn't anything that I can't do in science fiction. Past, present, future, Black, white, Hispanic, Asian, whatever. I can get away with all sorts of things in science fiction. And fantasy, I should say, that might not be that possible in trade fiction. Never, I can.
Future, what he saw with.
She talks about here why she likes writing science fiction. But later on in this interview, she talks about inserting herself into her own novel.
What kids science fiction was. I made up my own stories to put myself in them. I wound up writing science fiction from the point of view of girls and women just because I was a girl and I am a woman. I wound up writing science fiction from the point of view of Black people because I am Black. But I've also explored and in a strange sense, I suppose, found out what it might be like to be a white male or whatever, you know. One of the things writing does is allow you to be other people without actually being locked up for it.
Thank you. Wonderful sense of humor. So that was just kind of looking at sci-fi and writing sci-fi and her inserting herself into her work. Okay, so now we've looked at almost all the things. We contextualized this historically. We've looked at scholarship about this. We looked at even what Octavia Butler says about her own work and a summary of work. Now we're going to focus on the themes in Octavia Butler's Kindred. Please understand that these themes are closely tied into this Black female experience in the book, right? You'll see themes of history and trauma and interracial relationships. I want you guys to just kind of make sure you connect how this is connecting from there to this experience that Dana has in the book. So the first theme I was thinking about is home and families, Dana and young Rufus. And there's a few quotes that I pulled out with this theme. However, the one I want to focus on is Alice Greenwood and Dana speaking here, okay? So, this is Alice. She says, he likes me in bed and you out of bed. And you and I look alike if you don't believe what people say. Dana replies, we look alike if we can believe our own eyes. Alice says, I guess so. Anyway, all that means is that we're two halves of the same woman, at least in his crazy head. And they're kind of thinking about this idea of Rufus and how they serve him in this way. And of course, Alice Greenwood, since she ends up having the baby that, sort of makes sense, she ends up having the baby that births Dana. This is a family here. Rufus, Alice, Dana. Okay, next is interracial relationships. Let me just start by saying there are two different types of interracial relationships. We have the one that we see here with Dana and Kevin, her husband, who she's married to. And while this is 1976, 9, something like that, in 1976/9, this is acceptable, right? It's legal. You can do it. It can happen. No one's going to sue you or put you in jail for it. However, we do know that in the story, their family doesn't have a problem with their relationship. However, it's something that they can do. Now, this relationship is consensual. The other type of relationship, interracial relationship, air quotes, interracial relationship of 1815 is not consensual typically. And I don't even know if we're gonna call it a relationship necessarily. But of course, we talked about the forced assault there. So what I wanted to look at here was Rufus. Actually, Rufus spoke to Dana right before these are Dana's thoughts about Alice and Rufus's relationship. I said nothing, but I was beginning to realize that I loved this woman to her misfortune. There was no shame in raping a Black woman, but there could be shame in loving one. That was very powerful there. And then our final thing that I have here is history and trauma. And while I have a few quotes up here, I want to focus on the last quote here that talks about this is Dana speaking of Sarah. Sarah in this book, she is the Mammy character. Okay, this is what Dana says about Sarah. She's the kind of woman who might have been called Mammy in some other household. The female Uncle Tom, the frightened, powerless woman who had already lost all she could stand to lose, and who knew as little about freedom of the North as she did about the hereafter. So she has this Mammy character has like nothing to live for here. Okay. Well, Professor, can you tell us how else time travel to this time period was traumatizing for Black women? Of course I can. That's what I'm here for. And this is what we all have been for today. Sure, let's talk about the Black Mammy figure. And here I am stealing from my national conference that I published last year from Modern Language Association. So Mammy is seen as her whole purpose is to be a nurturing wet nurse. We kind of see this happening in other 19th century literature, scenes in Georgia, 1827, written by Isabel Drysdale. Now in this work, Mammy is seen as a tool. And this is kind of an image, we'll kind of talk about that a little later. But in Isabel Drysdale's work, Scenes in Georgia, chapter 2 is titled The Negro Nurse, not the other N, the Negro Nurse. And the person that plays the Mammy in this chapter is Old Chloe. And this is how she's described. She's wearing the coat of shiny stuff and checked apron. She has a bright red handkerchief, matronly decency of appearance. And later we find that she's an occasional nurse to her master's, Old Chloe's master's daughter. Okay, and as we see here, this person, this is like a good, I guess, image of how Mammy might have looked. But we can also notice that this is Aunt Jemima, right? She's selling pancakes here. She's used to sell this pancake. She is a tool to sell food. And there's a whole history behind Aunt Jemima and how at first was not selling at first. But this character was used to sell the pancakes. And you see, she's kind of portrayed as happy, smiling servant. Okay. And I think some of us may know about Aunt Jemima and the rebranding. At first, it was Aunt Jemima as recently as 2020, but it got changed from Aunt Jemima to Pearl and Company, which is what we may know it as now. Back in February 2020, Quaker Oats decided to be really nice to us and rebrand the syrup and the pancakes and the things like that because they wanted to empower and uplift Black girls and women. Thank you, Quaker Oats. It only took you 200 years, right? But Mammy, while she was seen as matronly, right? She was seen as matronly, she's seen as sell pancakes, she's seen as all these things. But also, she's seen as sexual, right? According to Ayanna Hawkins Owen, who is a professor at Boston University, she talks about this sexualization of Mammy. There's something very sexy, tempting, and tasty about Mammy, since she has not yet disappeared, but she persists. Hitting the erotic nostalgia of domination and continuing to haunt the margins of asexual identification. So there is this sexiness of the memory of controlling Mammy. That's wonderful and sexy to say. Slave owner, but then also she's made sure that she has this asexual identification, right? We saw that image of Mammy often probably seen as asexual, not desirable, but still kind of sexy. That's not maddening, nor is it oxymoronic. Okay. Also, this Black female slave was seen, and this is Deborah Wright again, was seen as responsible for the male libido. She took responsibility for their libidinous nature. As one Alabama slave owner puts it, he did not know more than one Negro woman that he could suppose to be chaste. He didn't know any African American women slaves who were chaste. Could that possibly be because you are sexually harassing all of them? That might be a thing. Gaslight much?
Yeah.
Okay, so now we have all these depictions. And so now I'm going to give you guys a final rhetorical question to chew on. Given that Dana, as a free Black woman who never experienced slavery, was involuntarily and randomly yanked back into a time when she was seen as either responsible for male libido. I don't know whether that second part is still there. Even if she was, maybe she would probably be sexualized. And then secondly, a wet nurse and tool who is a happy servant, smiling slave. But if she failed to fulfill any of these oxymoronic roles, she'd be raped, beaten, or killed. Question, is it any wonder why this is a traumatic experience of time travel? We can answer that question if we want to or not. But, follows. Thank you for attending my talk. And then I have my works cited page back, oh wait, maybe not, but it is on here, so. Also, one thing I want to know, and I'm totally nerding out right now, but on the back page, you guys, I'm like the third to last works cited entry. Oh my gosh. Oh, thank you. That's all I had. I guess we can open it now to questions, comments, concerns, thoughts. Yes, anyone else? We have your
I have a question. Did you say expand on her title, Kindred? I just think that's a really fascinating title, really. And I'll Google it later, but I was wondering if you
be there, but she might be able to.
Oh.
I didn't mean to tell her. Okay. So you can unhear that.
No, it's true. Yeah.
Right, no, so there's two. So she actually wrote a short story entitled Next to Kin. Kindred has nothing to do with that. And that one, since this one, what she's intimating is that what we do to each other, we're doing to family. And so we're all kindred. And so.
I mean, all of society or
Yes.
just like actual?
All of society, especially
Oh,
American
that's
society. Yes, so that's the whole point. You think that you are performing these acts of violence to someone who's different, that's actually your kin. Like, and how do you feel about that? Is what it's called.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other thoughts or questions that we're thinking? I think we had an attendant in the back row who had their hand up. You can really see it.
Nobody else says.
She's so tall. Oh, do you have a question? I think there's a kind of hand right there. Yeah, go ahead.
What is your name, by the way? I'm sorry.
Professor Andrea Walton.
Thank you.
It should be on the front. No, it's not. You can look at my name on my flyer. Let's go back. Sorry. Down there, maybe not.
Thank you very much.
Other questions or some thoughts? Yes. Yes.
Like I got.
It's half of that.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Sorry. So one thing that I've always wanted to discuss. Sorry, it is what it is. Is why the 70s? Why not take us another century in the future? Right, with Dana and Kevin. Why the 70s? I mean, I think I have answers, but I just want to know what you thought. Because she could have picked, if you're gonna time travel back from a space and have the experience be traumatic, why make that your focal point when it could have been one that was less fraught? Because the 70s weren't all that great for interracial relationships either.
Do you know?
I can guess.
What were you thinking?
Because, I mean, I don't know anything, but interracial relationships were problematic and, I mean, not problematic for some people. I think. So if you time travel, you hope that in 100 years, we're not talking about this BS stuff. Like interracial relationships are not thing of the past, and but the 70s was difficult. I mean, and if you think about it, some people are still talking about being problematic for them.
Yeah, I wouldn't have picked it, I wouldn't have picked this year. Like seriously, I wouldn't have. Like it's still problematic. Like I would not have picked today.
Okay.
But I just,
What would you pick? What year?
probably enough, yeah. Just keep moving it forward. Like if the price is right, we'll go the other way. We'll just keep spinning until it's.
Like about what year you think we're finally getting moved past.
Hopefully we can get to that
I'm
point.
curious.
Yeah, I mean, when will the aliens actually get here? Is, you know, probably like 5 years after that.
Yeah.
Cause I just don't see human beings, we find ways to be divisive and stratify each other. So I just always wondered like, why that year? Again, I have thoughts, but I just want to know what you guys
I was gonna say, Dr. Knighty has a question in the chat here for you. Do you think Kindred published in 79 is more relevant today than when it was originally published?
would it have been more relevant today? Because I think that we still have this issue of race, this issue of equality.
It basically ties back into what exactly what
Right.
she's saying.
Yeah. I mean, it looks different, you know, it's not necessarily whatever would be illegal, but it still has its inherent problems that will make it problematic. Yes, it's the same thing.
I have another question too.
Sure.
I did not watch the Hulu special series. Did they set the Hulu series in the 70s as well?
No, they said it
I-
in the now,
Right.
and they use today's technology.
Ah.
That was one of the things that, yeah. They
Yeah, I
used
just
today's
like
technology.
I just thought it was a good summary. section. Okay, thanks.
But you know, that's, I mean, if you know, if you're gonna use it, you gotta cite them both, because they're different. The Color Purple book is different from the movie,
Oh, yeah.
right?
You know, I
So,
did.
yeah.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
did. Yes, I did the Hulu thing and.
Mhm.
I did. Yes.
So you had a lot of really good points on characterization. How do you think those characters and that context really interacted with the plot itself? Do you think they meshed well? Do you think that there were things that could have been improved? What are your thoughts on the book as a whole?
Could you repeat the question? I couldn't hear.
Okay. Yeah. Go ahead.
Just how did the characterizations and these contextual points that we just talked about, how did those work with the plot? And from that, I guess, how would you say you thought the book worked as a whole, as like a full unit?
I think that in order for Dana to experience what she experienced, she would have had to have been born when she was born, experienced her life before she knew slavery, of course, she would never have experienced slavery. I think she would have had to have been that person in order to get that kind of reaction out of the audience. So I guess in that way it's effective. I think it's telling that her husband, when he gets pulled back to 1815, it's telling, but then it doesn't really surprise me that he gets pulled back to 1815 with her, and he's able to make a life. She, however, is running for her life. So, I think that that's, again, it works if the point of the book is to upset you, to make you upset with history, be upset with the fact that there's records for these folks. It works to that set, and I think that it helps to kind of bring home the point. So I think it works in that way, yeah. Does that answer your question? Ladies, you have a thought? Let your hand.
I was just gonna say like how I thought like it all tied in is like it's a paragraph. So it's like Rufus is a white person that she has to coddle and get through life, but she has a white husband that she loves. So when she goes back and forth, she's battling like her inner thoughts of like discomfort and like not wanting to go through slavery as one, but going home to a husband that she loves and that cares about her, but is the same figure as these people who despise her. So it's like a self-war within herself. That's why like I feel like when she goes back and forth, like, and he comes finally and he like tries to play as her master and all of this other stuff, it's kind of hurting her and him because they have to like be at each other just to make it through. And I don't think he understood that until he went back with her and seeing what she had to go through, which kind of ties it all back together, which I think the characters matter, but they don't all play together unless you're like, I don't know, once you read it, the whole thing, like it ties all together at the end with a bow, because then you understand like why everything was and why it happened the way it did because of the characters. Even though they were separate, they all came together at the end, and you could see the like the picture of her saving her family, seeing the family history, then Alice and Rufus being her great-great-grandparents, all the way down of why she had to not let him do so much, but also like lead him in the right direction to make her life still possible. Because if she didn't, then it's like, what would happen if she let him do certain things? How would her life turn out? I think that's what I was thinking when like the characters tie back to each other.
Thank you. Thank you. Good answer. you have any thoughts? Questions, Dr. Oliver?
Oh, no, I was just agreeing with that point. That's an excellent point, because that also kind of underscores with both Lucas and Alice and Kevin and Dana, that they're able to love those women, but not empathize with them. Right? And so you get this disconnect between, right, the feelings and the do, as opposed to the understand.
What's really kind of a bizarre moment in that quartet is when Dana realizes that she has a stake in Alice's sexual assault. Right, when she's like, I have kind of this like biopolitical stake in making sure that this happens, even though I recognize it as this horrific violence.
Yes.
Right, and so we have these really vexed forms of resonance between the 70s and 1815, because in the 70s, and I think with Dr. Oliver's point, the idea is that that's the time when people were really saying slavery doesn't matter. It's not here. Slavery doesn't matter. It has not shaped our society, right? And I think Butler's point is that no, these resonances are very present, very active, and they still change us. And we all have a kind of historical stake in the existence of those resonances, because they inform who we are, regardless of whether or not we openly acknowledge that. And I think that's also emphasized when Kevin stays for 10 years and he comes back and they come together, and Dana has a moment because he starts defending these white enslavers, and she's like, you're not even that different. Like, what happened to you? You know? So I just to, move from some of the conversations that y'all been having, I thought that those kinds of resonances were really interesting and important in terms of situating those two time periods next to one another.
Thank you, over hand. Yes.
There was a question asked, I think, on the Google Meet that I wanted to, that I've been thinking about. It was how much more relevance the book might have in the modern day rather than to the 70s. And I think the point that it's trying to make is even clearer now than it was in the 70s, because we're no longer coming off the back end of the civil rights movement. Societally, things do not feel as actively tense, but the trauma that she brings into the modern day, the ripples from the 1800s are that much more shocking that they're still here.
Thank you. Yes. Okay, good points, great points. Other quotes.
There's another chat question. Given your lecture in the context of slavery you gave us, do you believe Ms. Butler accurately portrayed the lived experiences of the enslaved? And if so, how do you think those lived experiences influence us as readers?
I think that just based off of some historical context that, I've gathered, I'm looking at, all my life and just thinking about history that I know, I do think that it does accurately portray. I mean, I found myself several times in this book feeling like Dana, and I just wanted to throw the book out the window. I was so angry. And just because we're thinking about this idea, actually, I felt like I was in the story, but I think that, I guess, it is actually accurately portrayed. What was the second part of your question again?
And if so, how do you think those lived experiences influence us as readers?
I think it influences us, and this is just my opinion, it influences us in the sense that while we're not there experiencing it, we are kind of removed from the situation. So we're able to look at it objectively. However, and I often wonder, would it have been it's not as traumatizing probably if I experienced it like firsthand. I guess
Does that help answer the question? Maybe not, I don't know, you're looking at me. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was gonna also say too, that if you're looking at, this notion of authentic, and I'm using air quotes with people online, I think what we get a lot of times with our representations of the past is we get the absolute worst or biggest case scenario. So we're accustomed to seeing huge plantations with hundreds, if not thousands of people, anonymous, anonymous, anonymous. And so it's very easy to distance yourself from that experience. But what she depicted was actually the typical. The typical enslaver only owned a handful, if not just one. Most households only had one person who was enslaved in the household. So think about how isolating that is, right? And how also intimate it is. And so in having this small, basically two families living side by side and interwoven in the ways that they are, it's almost worse, because it's like you're doing this quite literally to your kindred, to your family, to the people you see and rely upon every day. If just one of those people were removed from this equation, their lives would change. Whereas with a large plantation, right, you hardly notice the comings and goings of a few people. Whereas here, like one person being removed changes a lot. And I think as a reader, for me at least, it just showed just how perverse you have to be in order to make those types of decisions without a heart. Like, and that's what that power relation does to you. It warps your ability to be human to another human. And
Yeah. I agree. I was gonna say, kind of to your point, and maybe to that question, where it talks about the authentic experience. Towards the end, I think maybe in the end of the book, it talks about, and I found some scholarship on there not being any record, right, of the events. So does that mean it didn't happen? No, it doesn't. It just means that the records were erased or burnt up or whatever they said happened to it.
Yeah, I have a question, more about, genre, and that's sort of situating, Kindred in the more recent, advent of neo-slave narratives that employ speculative or fantastical elements. You see Beloved, you see Colson Whitehead's The Underground Railroad, right, River Solomon, for instance, for something a little more recent. What do you think is the sort of social, cultural, or political efficacy of the neo-slave narrative, like today?
that is. Oh, you want me to answer that?
Yes, I do. Thank
Oh,
you.
gosh.
I don't even know if I could run.
Well, see, for me,
Sorry.
that
I'm
is-
sorry, Justin, I didn't mean that.
No worries.
Okay.
No, it's okay.
Okay, sorry.
That is actually the whole point of it. The neo-slave narrative does what Butler, I think, actually modeled in the beginning, and that is write yourself into these situations with your own voice and your own autonomy. And so the amanuenses of the past, where a formerly enslaved person told their story to someone and that person wrote it down, they had no control over what they wrote down. Whereas with the neo-slave narrative, the neo-liberation narrative, the person who is in the now is able to voice those people who didn't have voices in the past. And so it's very much speculative, and it fills in those gaps. And so you're getting more of a whole story. I think of like Nancy Rawls' My Gym, which is the other family's version of what happened to Jim and you know what I'm saying? The Adventures of Mary Finn. So we get this version of Jim, who is a caricature, and she writes his family's version of him. He's in there in the middle, right? And so, yeah, you get to voice those people with more humanity. That's the whole point.
So then why not realism?
Because realism requires you to revisit the trauma.
Okay.
And so you can do the speculative without engaging in trauma porn. Because that's why a lot of people were reading those things. It was trauma porn. They loved hearing about the beatings. They loved hearing about the children being torn away. They loved it. It was it made a lot of money. Why do you think Frederick Douglass rewrote his own narrative 10 times? He was making money off his own porn.
Thank you. I don't know if I said anything else, you did. So, thank you. Thank you. Are we done?
Anybody else has any other questions?
You're welcome. I think we were, do you have any other questions, comments, concerns? About any other things? Okay. Oh, you. Thank you all.
So my name is Amy Glass, and I'm the coordinator of the One Vote One College program. So I'd like to thank Justin for coordinating this with me. I'd like to thank Andrea for doing this great presentation for us. I put in the chat a link to the feedback form, and there are feedback forms up here for the in-person attendees to fill out, and we'd appreciate that. If you've got to come for extra credit, there is, make sure you sign in. So, and other than that, thank you very much. Have a good evening.